But one question, Linda, is giving rewards for just like normal daily activity around the house. Just your opinion, chores, doing the dishes, what have you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think every person in a house is part of the family. And a family runs on chores being done. It should not fall all on one or two people.
Yeah.
I believe that children should be given age-appropriate chores, and that, again, if they don't follow through on their own, that there needs to be a consequence that happens on a consistent basis. Because, okay, let's look at the broader principle. Broader principle is when your child reaches 18, they go off to college or get a job, and they're on their own. If they haven't learned how to do life and do chores,
Yeah.
what's their life going to be like at that point?
Yeah.
They're going to be sitting around waiting for somebody to bring them meals or do their dirty laundry, or because, and this is something that I talk to parents a lot about. We look at the word discipline as a negative word. Discipline is not a negative word. If you look at it in scripture, discipline means to train somebody. It doesn't mean to punish somebody. It means to train, okay?
Yeah.
That's a parent's responsibility. We're given the responsibility and the awesome opportunity to teach our children how to do life spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And that means that if you're part of a family, you need to participate as part of the family, and everybody participates in doing chores. And if you don't do chores, then there needs to be a consequence so you remember to do chores, because you're not pulling your weight as part of the family.
Yeah. How does internal versus external motivators work? I mean, it would be wonderful, if children did chores around the house out of the goodness of their heart and their, love for their family. But I don't know if, that's something oftentimes that needs to be grown into. And I mean, like, we work jobs, but we get paid. So just the thought, like, of, when should we use external and when should we try to appeal to internal motivations for doing things like chores?
Well, I think that, first of all, the consequences have to be external, because that's how you internalize something. You feel the pain of the consequence of your decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah.
for instance, you've got, Tina, you have a 5 or 6 year old, right? That 5 or 6 year old is well capable to collect all the garbage in the house and bring it down to the garbage can and put it so that the bigger garbage can be taken out to the street. That's a definitely age appropriate thing for a 6-year-old to be able to do, okay? And so you set up a chart, okay? There's a lot of different ways you can do it. If I'm just going to use, if Sammy, the 6-year-old, has a chart on the refrigerator and he sees that on Tuesdays or whenever the trash day is, that he's responsible for collecting the garbage, then there's a sign, and if he does it without being told, then he gets a star or so many points, or however you want to configure it. And on the chart is also, if you get 5 points, then you get to have a half an hour of video games, or whatever the reward is. So you're rewarding good behavior. But if little Sammy forgets to do it, then you can deduct, or you can do what I told Samantha. Feel free to eat your next meal in my house when your chore is done. Because both of those are external rewards, but what you're doing is that you're rewarding the behavior that is the positive behavior that trains the child, but there's a consequence from him making a choice not to do the chore when he was told to do it, and that consequence needs to help him feel the pain that the quality of his life isn't going to be so good if he decides not to do what he's been asked to do, because there will be a consequence that he needs to live out. And so the consequence has to be the teacher, not the parent going and lecturing. You let the consequence be teaches. And you can be really sad. Gosh, I'm so sorry you won't get to eat lunch today because you didn't collect the garbage. I hope that, you know, you'll remember next time and you'll be able to eat lunch with us. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense too, you know, external consequences. Obviously, you know, even the thought of, you know, disciplining internally, like you can reason, you know, to a certain degree, you know, why is it important to participate in this chore? But obviously the heart's really, really delicate. You don't want to take a chance of doing any wounding or anything. And so if they see the external consequence, then they can kind of take it through their own filter and understand, you know, hopefully make sense of it in a safer way, so to speak.
Well, and the key to that, Rob, and I would say, and this takes some real discipline on the parents' part, is to be able to allow the consequence to happen without anger or nagging or lecturing, because that's what we tend to do. And we tend to either be helicopter parents, where we're always telling people what to do to protect them from having to endure a consequence, or we're like a drill sergeant and we're always yelling and shouting and telling kids what to do. And that doesn't, I mean, both of them, okay, a helicopter parent sends the message that you're too fragile to manage life, so I have to help you all the time. The drill sergeant parent, the implied message that you get from being a drill sergeant is that you're too dumb to know what to do in life, so I have to tell you and bully you into doing it. Neither of which produce that internalization of self-discipline. Okay, it's only the consequences. Okay, let's put it in adult terms. What happens if you buy a car and you have a loan to pay and you don't pay the loan on time for a couple of months? What happens?
Repossessed.
It's repossessed. That is an external consequence that is probably painful enough for an adult to learn the lesson. Gosh, I better pay the loan payment on time every month or I'm not going to have a car. Do you see? So it's not just applicable to children, it's applicable to adults as well. And don't you want your children, when they're old enough to leave the nest, to be able to understand those basic principles and be able to manage their life in a healthy adult way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It starts with these little places, like taking out the trash, like doing what you say you're going to do. If you say I'm going to get up at 3 o'clock and do my homework, then be a person of your word, and do it. Otherwise, there's a consequence that has to happen because I'm training you. I'm not punishing you. I'm training you. I'm training you to be able to manage life well when you walk out the door when you're 18.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Okay.
All this talk about consequences. We have, well, like our oldest, our 12-year-old, like you give him boundaries and he stays like a mile away from the boundary because he never wants to break any rules. And our 9-year-old one is always a boundary pusher. But the talk about consequences reminded me how our 9-year-old, he will give a consequence, and he's very optimistic. His personality is just very optimistic, but he'll turn that consequence into a fun thing. Like, okay, Liam, you made that window dirty, so you now have to clean the window. And like, well, I love cleaning windows, and then so it almost if I mean he's optimistic about it, and it might not be a bad thing at all. I'm just wondering if there's anything to be addressed there, if that's just how it is. It's like,
Well, I think maybe a couple of things. I think I really want to applaud you that you are following through and making him clean the window. It might be a little bit, oh, I'm going to get back at them by making them think, it doesn't bother me a bit. Okay. But the other point is you're making him do it, and it is writing something on his heart.
yeah.
Oh, if I make a mess, I need to clean it up.
Yeah, and I think his optimism is probably sometimes genuine because that's just who he is. But yeah, we never, like, if he's optimistic, we never back down and say, oh, well, if that's not a consequence, then you don't even have to do it. Like, he still has to follow through and do it. But.
Absolutely. So I think, it might be like, well, I'm not going to let them know it bothers me, kind of thing. But you're following through and you're training him. And that's really the important point, that, he's learning that every decision he makes has some kind of consequence. And it's the same for every adult. Every thought we have and every decision we make brings some sort of a consequence, whether we see it immediately or not.
And they're like same, I think too, like along the same lines, like we have, sometimes it feels like any consequences that we do might not be getting through to him because we have these marble jars that, like, if they get a reward, they put a marble in. If they don't do something, they take a marble out. So it's just like a visual reminder for them. But all that to say, like, sometimes I feel like that doesn't get through to him enough to even care, because, like, it might be for small stuff, like, like, okay, this is the 4th time this week I've come home from work and your socks are just thrown all over this living room and you haven't picked them up. You're going to get a marble taken. And he's just like, oh, whatever. Like, he takes the marble, he loses a marble, and then it has no impact on him. It seems
well, sure, because the marble doesn't have any real intrinsic value.
Yeah, it does.
Well,
oh, okay.
25 cents.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like if they fill up their marble jar, they can get an app on their iPod and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's sort of, he's getting too old maybe for that process. I don't know, because it feels like it's just losing its weight. Like,
okay.
25 cents isn't enough.
I'm sorry. I can't hear you, Janelle.
I said maybe 25 cents isn't enough.
Inflation.
Inflation. No, seriously. I mean, is there something that he really would like to be able to buy with that money?
Well, sometimes what we do is we have this whole system. We call it like a video game marble. He has to earn so many marbles that equal video game time. So if we take away a video game marble, that's taking away video game time, and that's
precious.
That's something he doesn't want taken away. But.
That's right. You find the thing that really gets his attention. Okay. So Yeah, I would work with
It's
that.
quicker to take the video game marble than the regular marble, I guess.
Yeah, I think that is what, because you want the consequence, the teaching. And if the video game time is precious to him, then that's where the consequence needs to be.
Linda, how about for like thinking of students, you know, going up to high school, like my daughter's going to be a senior next year, and, you know, graduating, going on to college, you know, not really, you know, a direct reward system in place there for, you know, and I know a lot of it's driven by character and individuality within the individual person. But like, is there any type of phase out, like phase to what it's going to be like after high school for those students that are nearing adulthood? Like, should those same those rewards, like, I mean, she probably would like the app marble, but I don't know. I'm just wondering if I need to help transition her. Like,
Well, so, you know, there are pros and cons and proponents and opponents to paying children an allowance. Okay. We were talking at the supper table tonight, and I tell this story when I teach boundaries, and I can neither confirm nor deny it may have happened in my house. But when my children were teenagers, the rule was each child, one of their chores during the day was for a week, they had to clean up the kitchen after supper. And I didn't care, because this is part of boundaries of giving people choices. I didn't care if they did their homework first, or they did cleaned up the kitchen first, or the other way around. But by the time they went to bed, the kitchen had to be clean. That was the boundary. That was the rule. Okay. So one night, actually we were living in Germany. My husband was in northern Iraq, protecting the Kurdish people. And so I had a really bad migraine headache, went to bed, had an ice bag on my head all night, heard one of my kids going, the one for whom the kitchen needed to be cleaned before they went to bed. So I went going up to bed. It was about 11 o'clock, and I needed more ice for my migraine headache. Went down, and lo and behold, guess what? The kitchen was still a mess. So I went upstairs, and I very calmly knocked on the door and said, the kitchen needs to be cleaned up. Well, I'm going to bed now. I knocked on the door again, and I said, the rule is the kitchen needs to be cleaned before you go to bed. I'll do it in the morning. I knocked on the door again, and I said, the kitchen needs to be cleaned up. So at that point, they got pretty huffy, came out the door, slammed down the stairs, and I said, I'll speak to you when you can be respectful. You need to go in the room until that happens. So they went there, they came back, they started slamming dishes in the dishwasher and broke a glass. And I looked very solemnly at them and I said, break all you can afford. I was so proud of myself. I didn't get angry.
That's good.
So the kitchen got cleaned up. That was on a Tuesday. On Friday, said child bombed home from school and said, Mom, can I have my allowance because I want to go to the PX? Sure, you can have your allowance. And at the time, we were giving the children $5 each. Okay, this was a lot of years ago. Okay. So I handed said child 25 cents. And they looked at me in astonishment and said, but I get $5. I said, yes, I know. But I went to replace that glass you broke the other night. And you know what? I couldn't buy just one. I had to buy 4. And here's the change. So
Yeah.
That child got 25 cents that week for their allowance. And guess what? I never had trouble getting them to clean up the kitchen on their week after that. Okay. So I say all that to say, part of my philosophy is, and I know different people have different philosophies, is that it's good to help children also learn how to manage money before they leave the household. Because and I haven't seen any recent information on this,
Get in there, please.
but they used to say that for kids who graduated high school and went to college, the first 18 months, the first year and a half, horrible for those kids because they had never learned how to manage life. And so they struggled not only with the academics, but with keeping up with all of the other things that they needed to manage being on their own. So it's kind of been my philosophy that you give children an allowance and that be part of the chores. And when they don't do them on their own when they should, then an amount gets deducted, or like what happened in our home, so that they understand that if they do something, there is also a monetary consequence. And it's the consequence that does the teaching. You're not angry about it. But the fact is that if you have to do the chore they were supposed to do, their nuisance being you doing that chore, because you had to take your time and effort out of what you had planned to do what they were supposed to do. And so taking that money out of their allowance is like, well, if I don't clean my house, I have to pay somebody to clean my house if I want a clean house. So if you don't do your chore and I have to do it, you need to pay me for doing it, because I had to take my time and my effort from what I needed to do to complete the chores that were given to you.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Next, I have another question. We actually went over this morning in devotional, and just to get your feedback on it. And Samantha, you can help correct me if I'm wrong. Like, so the obviously with this extra time with our children, like we're asking things for them to do, like, throughout the day. And so many times, more times than I prefer, like I ask, somebody to do something, one of my children to do something, and they don't listen right away. And so one of the things that I'm working on is, oftentimes if they don't hear me at a normal tone of voice, then I'll ask again at a louder tone of voice, which sometimes can come across as being angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the Bible is very clear that we should be slow to get angry. So I'm trying not to, raise my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had the discussion during devotional this morning, and Mrs. Locke shared that the one thing that she's doing is she'll simply walk over, she'll say to the person the first time they don't respond. And then the second time she phrased it like in the form of a question, like, so why are you not doing this thing that I asked you to do?
Yeah. She said, is there a reason why you're not doing the thing I asked you to? Is there a reason why you didn't take out the garbage, or is there a reason why you didn't make your bed? She'll put it in the form of a question, like he said. But that was Some
of the collateral comments then from other people. One mom said, well, I don't even want to have to ask my child a second time to do things. Like, why? What's the reason for not? Like, as soon as you go to that, then you're sort of giving them a second chance, and in a way indirectly encouraging them not to listen the first time. So that was the one mom's concern. But yeah.
Okay, so this is my question. How many times do you have to tell your children, hey, who would like to go get ice cream or go out for a hamburger?
Right.
You don't even get it all the way out.
Okay.
Can I caveat one thing, Linda? I do know, though, on the other hand, that sometimes, like, for example, my wife will say something to me, where are the children? And I'll be like, I'm in like a different planet. Like, I really did not hear what you just said to me. And so my children have learned, like, sometimes I'm just so deep in thought, like they'll have to say things like 3 or 4 times until like I come to consciousness. And so I have a little bit of like understanding how sometimes it's like, if you get really focused in on something, it can be hard to let go. So that's the only other little side thing.
Sure, but I think in terms of children, if they can hear, let's go get ice cream, okay, and my caveat is this, that when you communicate with people, which, for what I do, communication is really important, that you make sure the person hears you the first time. So if you are in the kitchen or up in the study and you're hollering at child down the hall, they may not hear you. But if you get up and you go and you stand in front of them and say, it is time for X, Y, and Z, and they don't listen to you, then the consequence has to be immediate. Okay? Because if they can hear you for the fun stuff the first time, they can hear you the chore stuff the first time.
Yeah.
And I will say, Rob, that when we continue to raise our voice, what we're actually training them to is I don't really have to listen until mom or dad's voice hits a certain decibel level.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because then I know they really mean I better move.
Right.
Whereas if you tell them the first time and you're sure they heard you and the consequence comes, you are training them, I better listen the first time because the consequence is going to come immediately. And so really what you're doing is you're making your words gold. You're not making them lead, because lead means I have to get so angry that they'll finally listen to me. So okay, it's all about training. It's all about discipline. What do you want? How do you want your children trained? Do you want them to be able to hear the voice of God and be obedient immediately? Or is God going to have to bring them lots of consequences because they haven't learned? Because God gave us the responsibility to act as his representative on the earth to our children. And so everything we say and do is a way of training them. And so if you put it in the broader perspective, teaching them that they don't have to listen until you've said it to them 2, 3, 4, 10 times, then you're really teaching them that they don't have to listen to God.
That's a great analogy. It's true, yeah. I think there's a lot of times there's deeper connections to things that we just don't necessarily understand on the front side, but there really is deeper connections like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's helpful to always keep this in mind. Whatever I do, what is it I'm training my child in at that point? Am I training the child to learn self-discipline and to internalize their discipline? Or am I training them that I have to come alongside and help them do life, or that they have to be yelled at to accomplish anything? And so, and if you're a helicopter or a drill sergeant, then people never internalize their own self-discipline. They're always going to want external motivation.
Mm. Mm.
Cool.
Wow.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah, I've kind of, this time of
Samantha's having a moment here.
Oh, because I struggle a lot with getting to the point of just being angry because I'm overwhelmed, and that's the way that I was raised. And I've always committed myself to not raise my children like that. And then I find myself in those same patterns.
Okay.
So I love what you're saying, but I promise you, I am feeling so convicted right now. Like, dang, I'm giving up on this. Oh,
You're not alone, Samantha. You're not alone.
Oh my God.
One of my friends gave me this. Sometimes I open my mouth and my mother comes out.
Or my dad.
Because, okay, in a spiritual context, okay, and this goes back to the prayer ministry stuff that I do, okay, when we see those kinds of behaviors in ourselves, okay, we need to ask ourselves, have I really forgiven the person that I'm behaving like? And part of that forgiveness is repenting for any judgments or vows that we have made. Because when we speak those things over other people or ourselves, Scripture is very clear that we're going to behave in that very same way. Okay? My dad was an angry person, and Samantha, just like you, I said to myself as a kid, I'm never going to do that. And guess who had to fight that anger? Okay? So I get it, but when I learned those principles, when you forgive somebody, you're not responsible for what they've done to you or said to you. You are never responsible for that. But if we respond sinfully, and Scripture's clear, we shouldn't judge and we shouldn't make vows, okay, in the sense that there's good vows and not so good vows. But when we say, like I said to myself, I'm never going to be like my dad, okay, it was me. I'm never going to be like my dad. It was kind of a self-righteousness that I thought I could do that all on my own. Instead of acknowledging, you know what, my dad was a wounded man. He didn't know how to handle his anger. Jesus, will you help me not be like my dad? See, that's a difference. It's not self-righteousness. It's asking the Lord to help you. And so I tell everybody, when you see those patterns of you doing the things that you said you'd never do, oftentimes it's because there's a vow or there's judgments there that we need to repent of because that was our sinful response to something that happened to us. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
So my daughter, my 5-year-old, I literally this whole time that we've been talking, I've had to put my kids in timeout. My daughter is currently screaming at me from the closed door. She's in timeout.
Mm-hmm.
She's my hardest.
Okay.
I kind of have wondered if there's a chance she might be on the spectrum.
Okay.
Because I don't know if Robert could speak to this, or well, maybe more like Virginia or Miss Cash because they're closer to her in the class, but just the way she responds to a lot of situations, she gets really angry about everything.
Okay.
Everything has to be fair. If you say a word the wrong way, she gets angry at you and she corrects you. Just I don't know. My brother, he has something similar. He was never officially diagnosed. So I'm just kind of struggling with like how to work with her, because I think sometimes she gets really sensitive about if she feels like I'm accusing her of something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Am I making any sense? I'm trying to
Sure.
process.
Okay. A couple of things. You used a word sensitive. It could be that she is highly sensitive, and highly sensitive people, a hangnail causes them to melt down, where a normal child wouldn't. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily mean that she's on the spectrum. Okay.
Okay.
Other thing I would ask is for you to think about what your pregnancy and labor and delivery was like with her. What were you going through? All of those kinds of questions, because it could be that there was something that was going on that she picked up when you were pregnant with her.
It was a very stressful birth.
Okay.
All of my children were, they were all C-sections. With her, the doctor, he accidentally sliced my, oh, what is it called? Where the pee collects, where does that, the bladder.
Bladder.
Uh-huh.
He had to sew up my bladder because when he was performing the C-section, he accidentally cut my bladder, so I had to be on a catheter. I'm a pretty young mom too, so I'm like just now like experiencing a lot of inner healing that I didn't have in the beginning of my parenting stages. So yeah, you're probably right.
Well, on the team at Life Center, I don't know, do you go to Life Center or?
Yeah.
Okay. I would really highly recommend that maybe you and your daughter make an appointment to see Sherry Anthony.
Okay.
Sherry ministers to children from the womb all the way to 99 years old. Okay. And we've had I've seen her do some amazing things. Okay. So let me tell you a story that we witnessed, or that I witnessed her doing when we were in Austria one time. Okay. And so this lady, she was one of the elders' wives in the church, said that her daughter, who at the time was 6, said she was just born stubborn. She was just born stubborn. And come to find out that when the little girl was born, she wasn't breathing very well. And so the doctors, of course, had to take her and do, some resuscitation. And the mother said, well, she was so stubborn. Her head was, looking around, and, she was just strong at that time. And Sherry said to her, no, she was looking for you. He wanted you because she knew your voice. She was scared of what they were doing to her. So she told the mother to go home and repent to the little girl for not being there and for allowing the doctors to take her away, and that she wasn't there. Okay, so I'm going to make the story a little bit shorter. So the mom went home and did that. And then Sherry was there with the mom when she did that. And the little girl, the mom repented to her, just burst into tears and just threw herself around her mother, which she was never a huggy child, okay? And but Sherry saw this little sadness in the little girl's eyes. And so the Lord gave her a word of knowledge and said, well, do you think that it was your fault that all this happened? And the little girl just started wailing. I mean, and so her mom just picked her up and said, this was not your fault. There was nothing wrong with what you did. I just comforted her and everything. And so
Hold on a second.
everybody was crying. I mean, it was good. So the next morning, okay, she's 6 years old. She wakes up, she comes, she hops in bed with mom and dad. She looks at her mom and she says, what took you so long to tell me all that?
Wow.
And from that point on, she became the very huggy, just affectionate child, which she had never been. So that was the story, a real life story. A couple of years ago when we were in Austria, and this woman had the most horrendous delivery. I mean, everything that hospital did, they should not be in business today because it was so awful, okay? And the mother was traumatized, the baby was traumatized, the baby was just limp. I mean, he had no muscle tone or anything. And so Sherry and I prayed over both of them to break off the trauma. And after we came home, maybe about a month or so, we got a YouTube, or not a YouTube, but a video from them saying that the trauma was totally gone from the mom. She wasn't having nightmares anymore. And that the little boy was actually fully caught up developmentally from where he was. And so I just give you those two stories, Laura, to give you hope that there can be, if it was traumatic, and it sounds like it really was, that there could be some stuff from the birth trauma that's affecting your daughter that could really, really pretty simply be laid to rest. Okay?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In case I don't have a chance to later on, like Linda leads a wonderful class called Love to Life. And it's, I don't know when your next one's going to run, Linda, but I just, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
It'll be in September. We just finished the one that we started in March, and because of the whole, shutdown thing, we actually finished up doing Zoom, which actually worked pretty well because we had some people coming from Delaware and Maryland, and so they didn't have to drive so far every night. But yeah, I mean, if you wouldn't mind, Rob, I can drop off some brochures for the class.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe right after school starts in August, if anybody would be interested. So
that sounds good. Yeah. Virginia and I both went through it right when we were pregnant with our first, Gabriella, and it was definitely a good segue going into marriage and to parenthood, and to understand some of these just core principle biblical values of relationship dynamics is incredibly valuable. I had one thing drop into my heart right when Laura was sharing. I don't know if it's a word or knowledge or anything, but it's regarding Lamb. So the thought that came into my heart is just concern for him, just the possibility of using optimism as a coping mechanism, like it, and just how I remember one time things were incredibly tight in school, and I was just suffering tremendously. And I went to a conference for administrators probably about 5 years ago. And I remember a guy came up to me, and I had like a big smile on my face. And he said, he's like, either things are going really well for you right now, or you're in a lot of pain. And I remember that because I was in a lot of pain, and he like read me like a book. And so and so I just think for like, because, Jamie shared there about how, in the face of consequences, Lamb responded with optimism. And I think that sometimes optimism can be a crutch, a coping mechanism and so I'm wondering if indeed that's the case with Lamb. If I may ask on your behalf, Janelle and Jamie, as an advocate for all the families of the school, like if he is using that as a coping mechanism, like what might be a good way to help him transition to the just to processing what's really at hand and not respond with just optimism.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. Often kids who are the class clown, they're actually sensitive and they're picking up tension in the room, or they're picking up some of the hurts and wounds of the other kids, or, and they'll use the humor or the behavior, the antics, as being the class clown as a way to break the tension.
Yeah.
So that can often be, the reason behind why they're doing it. Some kids are just funny. I mean, but oftentimes it's a way to relieve their tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a sweet little package there on your.
Yeah. The boys were watching her, but she was getting tired of them, I think. I think she knew we were upstairs.
So any recommendation there then, Lindo, on how to help them to...
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's okay.
Help him process
the tension instead of turning to
optimism.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be a good thing for both of you to just kind of seek the Lord and ask the Lord to show you what's going on with him first. Okay. And then, just sit down and do you guys to do listening prayer with your older ones?
Yeah. Well, you mean like we do, like we haven't, it's been a little bit, we do soaking times and we all go around and see if we've got anything from the Lord, or is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of like that, but you can also utilize it as, okay, let's ask Jesus if there's something deeper in my heart, because when there's a consequence, I always laugh about it, or, you can do that, like, say the two boys are squabbling over something.
Yeah.
You can sit them both down and say, okay, let's pray and ask the Lord to tell each one of you what the issue is for why you're for why you're fighting. So you're training them that when there's something going on that's negative in their life, the first thing that they need to do is stop and say, okay, Jesus, why is this happening? What's in me that's causing, this reaction? And it's really good, because then you're teaching, again, you're training, you're disciplining the children that when there's something going on, the first person they turn to use a Joyce Meyerism, they go to the throne, not the phone. So that the first person that they seek is the Lord, and say, okay, like Samantha said, I see myself, saying the things that I decide, saying I never do those things. Okay, Jesus, why am I doing the same things I said I'd never do? What is buried in my heart that makes me want to do those things? Because really, God's all about relationship. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but the only person you can change is you. You can't change somebody else. You can't change your kids. You can't change a spouse. You can't change a friend. The only person that you can change is you. Because if you change and you are walking more like Jesus every day, then your relationships are going to change.
Yeah.
Because you're not entering into relationship the way you used to. Okay. So I say all that to say is that when there's something negative going on in a relationship, the first person to always start with is to say, God, what's my part in this? It may only be 3%, or it might be 15%, but you've got to take responsibility for whatever percentage part that is, and be willing to do what you need to do before the Lord to get your heart right. And then you can see clearly to do what the Lord wants you to do. It was interesting. In the mornings, my husband and I always read a chapter of the Bible and pray together. And so I think it was Monday, we were in John chapter 12. And Jesus made a statement. He's quoting from Isaiah, in Isaiah 6:10, I think it was, that their eyes and their heart were darkened. And it just really hit me. And so being a nurse, I went and looked up, okay, what's the connection between eyes and heart? And it's really interesting because an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor, can look in your eyes and tell whether or not you have heart disease.
What? Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
First is the natural, then the spiritual, it says in Corinthians. So if our eyes aren't seeing clearly, it's of what's really going on. It's because there's an issue, a spiritual issue where I've hardened my heart. And you and Jesus are the only ones that can change that area in your life. Because if you remove the area where your heart is hardened, then you're going to have clearer vision for what's really going on in situations in relationships.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've gone to preaching, but
That's okay. Yeah. That's what I kind of see the the Holy Spirit's, taking us through a refinement process where, like with repeating patterns that we've seen before in our past, like, yeah, maybe they were sort of effective in some ways and maybe got their desired results. And so sometimes when we just don't know what to do, we have a tendency to fall back on what we've seen modeled, and what we've seen to be at least somewhat effective is better than nothing.
Mhm.
But I feel like, the Lord's just calling us to, to that, like, just for our eyes to be more enlightened and our heart, to be more enlightened, and to, find a better way, like his ways, and how to handle things. And we're just, shedding off past models for a better model that's in Christ.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, it's been a
other
challenge.
questions?
I just was going to say it's kind of been a little bit of a challenge in quarantine because, like, there's less consequences to draw from. Like, I can't say, okay, sorry, you're not going to be able to go to your friends this weekend because you didn't do your chores. So really, basically, like, one of our, I don't know, also, like, Samantha, I'm not sure if I have the courage to tell my children they're not going to have a meal. So basically,
It's very
you know,
motivating, Rob. It's very motivating. Trust me.
I believe you.
Chug a gallon of water.
That's right.
Fasting 101.
That's right.
Our main go-to has been, you're going to lose your electronic device for a given period of time, which really, causes things to hit the fan at times. But yeah, so it's posed different challenges, but it's been good at the same time.
Well, I think you're right, Rob. It has been a refining time because when you're with people 24/7, all of the issues that you haven't resolved up to this time get exposed,
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
potential to be exposed, and either look at them as it's awful or it's an opportunity to grow into Christ likeness. I mean, that's just the bottom line. So it's not really fun, you know, disciplining yourself to do things in a different way takes time and effort. And again, I'm going to go back to Joyce Meyer. It's either the pain of regret or the pain of discipline. And you get to choose. And so if you don't discipline yourself, if you don't train yourself, or if you don't train your children, then the only other option is the pain of regret.
Wow. I just think of how that relates to even like diet and healthy eating and exercise. It's the same thing holds true.
Yeah. Exactly.
Can
So I didn't like that when she said it, but the longer I thought about it, I thought, you know what? It's really true.
Yeah.
Every word we speak, with every thought we think, and with every action we do, we're either disciplining ourselves or we're going to live in regret over it.
Yeah. What's maybe encourage us, Linda, just a short list of, and all of our families are different with different age children, some disciplines, like you mentioned the one about, you know, reading a chapter in the morning with your husband and praying, which I greatly admire. Just for like with our children, just some disciplines that we should be looking to incorporate on a regular basis.
Are you talking spiritual or?
Yeah, spiritual.
Okay. Yeah. I find, I mean, you want spiritual disciplines, but sitting children down to read a chapter every day and pray with them like that is going to get really boring and they will just tune out. Okay. So you have to be really pretty creative. You know, you have to, especially with the ones who are old enough to read, make them responsible. You know, have the devotion time, have it, you know, be disciplined to have it at the same time, whether it's morning or evening, you know, whatever works into your schedule. Make it short. Don't try and drag it out. Kids don't have that kind of an attention span. And assign the children a certain part of it. You know, like the older ones, you can say, okay, I want you to read the first 5 verses of John 15, and I want you to come up with, you know, something creative that you've learned out of that. Okay, so involve them. I love the book by Sean Bolz, where he talks about how he grew up in an Air Force family, and they would sit around and pray and ask the Lord to give them words of knowledge. And that's how he developed his prophetic gift. Because before they would move each time, they would pray and ask the Lord to reveal to them who their friends were going to be, their house was going to look like, which church they should go to. And the Lord just would tell them all of these things. And then they'd watch the Lord bring it to pass when they moved.
Wow.
You can do something creative like that with your children. Maybe it takes 3 to 5 minutes, but you just say, okay, we're all going to sit here and pray and ask the Lord to tell us something that he wants us to know tonight. And then you go around the circle and you ask. But you're going to have to switch it up. But the boundary is we're going to have devotion time, but it can't be doing the same thing every night or every time, because they'll get bored with that. Okay. But you can include them and again, train them how to listen to the Lord for themselves. Maybe it's been a really hectic day and everybody's been fighting with everybody else. And so during devotion time, the question is, Jesus, would you reveal to each one of us what was going on that we were all fighting with each other today. And then you could do a follow-up question after everybody says something. Jesus, what was my part in it? You know, when I do conflict resolution with families, there's usually two factions, okay? And I bring them in and I open in prayer and I say, here are the ground rules. We're going to speak respectfully to each other, and we are going to not argue. And if their arguing starts, I will stop it and it will be over for the evening. And then I hand each side a pad of paper and I say, okay, I want you to pray and ask the Lord to show you what you have done to contribute to the breakdown in this relationship. Because it goes along with the principle I said a few minutes ago. If there's a problem in a relationship, you have some responsibility for why that relationship is where it is. And you need to ask the Lord what it is in me that the Lord wants to fix. And so that eliminates the pointing of the finger at the other person, because you're willing to take responsibility for your own part in whatever is going on. So with a family devotion kind of thing, when you say, okay, Jesus, why were we all fighting today? And everybody goes around and says what the Lord showed them. Then the next question is, okay, Jesus, what is my part in it? And what do I need to do to make that right? Because then you're helping them internalize those principles of not accusing other people, but beginning to take responsibility for their part in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think, speaking of attention spans, I think
I was noticing that.
I think my attention span is starting. I might have to go back and listen to a couple of your responses on the video. I was with you 98% of the time, but there was a couple of my brain is like, whoa.
I noticed the drift.
Linda, what was you mentioned Sean Bolt's book? Was that a book for kids, or that was just a book?
No, gosh, I wish I could remember the title of the book. It was one of his first couple of books where he tells his testimony of how he developed his prophetic gifting.
Okay.
Nice.
But I just found that story fascinating, that
Yeah.
they literally sit around and listen to the Lord to give them prophetic words about the next place they were moving.
Yeah, that's
And what's his name, you said?
Sean, S-H-A-W-N, Boltz, B-O-L-Z.
Oh, B-O-L-Z. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I had something similar, just real quick. And my pastor, when I was up at State College Assembly of God, he asked me to be a part of the prayer ministry team. He just saw my heart for the Lord at that time. And so I would be up there praying for people, and some of the people that would come up would have very serious needs in their life. You know, a couple one time had AIDS, another mom had a baby in her womb with no brain in the baby skull. And I would hear these intense needs, and I just like, God, you got to speak to, they're here for prayer. I got to hear from you on how, something, and just, having needs to turn to the Lord to give him a chance to speak. Like with Sean, it was moving to a new location. That really does help to sensitize one's heart to the Holy Spirit.
And with children, especially the younger ones, okay, they may come up with some really fantastical impressions from the Lord. But you know what? Jesus meets kids right where they are. Mm-hmm. And so in a prayer session one time, Sherry said, well, let's go meet with Jesus. So where is Jesus meeting with you? The little guy goes, "We're sitting on a lollipop." Okay. You know, a lot of parents would go, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But no, God meets people right where they are. And so my next question would be, well, ask Jesus why he's meeting with you on a lollipop. Because it's often a very prophetic answer for why he picked to show the person that particular thing. For instance,